Riley is an example of our future, and that's really what we're going to be talking about. Back in that day, the historians and the technologists brought to the leadership of England this council that they needed to invest in the machine gun and gas, or at least find ways of fighting through those, because those would change the character of war. And they ignored it, saying, we've got time, we've been the best, so we will be the best, projecting the past into the future. We do the same today. And this community in America brought the technologies that are emerging and the strategies that are emerging internationally and domestically to this administration. And this administration said, build a Space Force. But the reason space is so powerful is not that it's just has a military application like a machine gun. It's because it will transform the four major engines of economic growth that have been consistent throughout mankind: transportation, information, manufacturing, and probably most important, the ability to deliver that transportation and information with energy. Energy. The seed corn of all development, all growth, all survival, energy. So energy, transportation, information, and manufacturing, these are the things that change humanity, that will change world power, and they are descending upon us in ways that are very unique. The technology is on the engineering benches today, but most Americans and most in Congress have not had time to really look deeply at what's going on here. But I've had the benefit of 33 years of studying and becoming friends with these engineers and these scientists. This technology can be built today with technology that is not developmental, to deliver any human being from any place on planet Earth to any other place in less than an hour. To deliver Wi-Fi from space, where you never need a cell tower to connect. To deliver energy from space, where you never have to plug your phone in and it trickle charges, and you can use that energy over time. It can be applied to cars, to houses. But here's why space is so much more powerful and why this question of a space force is so important. It's because we have competition today. If the development of space to do these things that I just described to you, transform the transportation economy to be able to deliver anybody anywhere on planet Earth in less than an hour, transform the energy market where everybody can trickle charge their batteries and capacitors to power anything on planet Earth from anywhere without any power lines, any power plants, transform information where you can get information about what's going on around you, and you don't need to be near a city or near a cell tower because you're delivering it from a network in space that can deliver it to every human being. And then we can manufacture things in space using the vacuum and zero-G to not only do research medically, but to build facilities and structures in ways we could have never done before and deliver them as light as a feather anywhere on planet Earth for pennies on the dollar of transportation costs in a linear sea, land, and air friction environment. And whenever humanity has a new marketplace like this, if there is not some guardian force that brings predictability to that economic marketplace, violence ensues. Pirates, thieves, and thugs steal what good men and women build. So as we look to these new markets and we see Elon Musk building a starship that will be able to launch from anywhere and go anywhere in less than an hour with massive volume and weight, and he throws up 12,000 satellites that will bring you Wi-Fi from space where you will laugh at your descendants or your fathers and mothers that had to rely on cell towers or see the little circle of death waiting for signal. They will laugh and scoff at that. They will laugh and scoff that you had to put fuel into your tank in your car or plug into a wall because your phone was running out of juice in the airports. The lines waiting for the outlet are no more.
You're listening to Skeptoid. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com. The UFO Rogues Gallery takes over America. In December of 2017, the New York Times ran a story that shocked America. It was the disclosure of a $22 million program at the Pentagon called ATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, accompanied by 3 short black and white video clips from an F-18 fighter screen. To most people, this was a seismic revelation. But to those who have studied UFO culture for a long time, it was yet another groan-inducing chapter in a long, long history involving the same cast of characters over many decades. A chapter in the book of how a small number of believers in the paranormal and alien visitation have used every tool at their disposal to persuade the American public of their viewpoint. It's a story involving many threads, many individuals, and many groups. And today we're going to do our best to use the skeptical eye to unpack and organize it as best we can. When the public is being successfully fooled, it's always worthwhile to pull back the curtain and reveal the tricksters. This is going to be a rare two-part episode, which I'm really bummed about because the whole point of it is to lay bare the through line that goes from the 1960s all the way to the present day. The same people making the same claims about UFOs, and only now, in the past few years, getting the huge amount of public attention. That's what's really critical to understand. You've seen these videos from the US Navy allegedly showing UFOs, and any reasonable person would assume that something new and exciting has been observed. But it hasn't. This isn't new news. It is literally 50-year-old news. However, once I got the episode written out, it was simply too long to squeeze into a Skeptoid episode. So I'm going to ask you to bear with me and sit on the edge of your seat for the full 1-week span between episode releases. Today we're going to pick up the story way back in the 1960s when it truly began. And next week, we'll bring it all the way to the present day. The spiritual leaders of this rogues gallery, as it were, are former astronomers and ufologists Jacques Vallée and the late J. Allen Hynek. They became friends in the 1960s over their shared interest in the metaphysical, specifically an idea they both shared based on their observation that poltergeists and UFOs both had a habit of appearing and disappearing. Their belief was that poltergeists and UFOs, explicitly referring to alien spacecraft in this case, were the same manifestation of interdimensional beings. Together with their young protege, the devout Scientologist Hal Puthoff, Vallée jokingly referred to their little group as the Invisible College, a reference to their special knowledge unseen by others. A recent graduate in electrical engineering, Puthoff began working at SRI International, a paranormal research institute formerly associated with Stanford University. And that's where it all began. Chapter 1, The Stargate Project, 1978 to 1995. At SRI, Puthoff became the director for all the work contracted to them by the CIA and DIA, pertaining to various programs researching remote viewing, the use of psychic powers to spy on the Soviets. Puthoff was particularly enamored by their research subject, Uri Geller. Even after Geller was thoroughly proven to be a fraud by Dr. Ray Hyman and kicked out of the program, Puthoff continued to promote him as genuine, and still does to this day. Under Puthoff, Stargate made such breakthroughs as one of their psychics claiming to have traveled back in time 1 million years to commune with Martians, I'm not kidding, and others describing the contents of photographs in a closed but unsealed envelope after having been left alone with the envelope for 1 hour. Author Martin Gardner later wrote that Puthoff and the others at Stargate, quote, imagined they could do research in parapsychology, but instead dealt with psychics who were cleverer than they were. Eventually, the CIA decided that $10 million was enough to have wasted on a whole lot of nothing, and the Stargate project was finally terminated. But before it was, one of the intelligence officials briefed on it was the staff director of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, a certain Chris Mellon. Keep that name in mind. Chapter 2, NIDS, the National Institute for Discovery Science, 1995 to 2004. It was 1995 and Hal Puthoff needed a new job. One of his friends was Robert Bigelow, a hotel billionaire who was fascinated with life after death. With Bigelow's considerable bankroll, Bigelow and Puthoff co-founded the National Institute for Discovery Science, NIDS, to study reincarnation, interdimensional beings, ghosts, UFOs, and other strange things they all believed were found on Bigelow's Utah property, the infamous Skinwalker Ranch, today the setting for an eponymous paranormal TV series. Also present at the founding in an unofficial capacity was the U.S. Senator Harry Reid. Also on the NIDS Board of Advisors was a familiar name, Jacques Vallée. During these years, Bigelow was able to persuade the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, to change their UFO reporting recommendation to NIDS. So for a while, pilots were making their UFO reports directly to Skinwalker Ranch. In 1996, local UFO reporter and friend of the group, George Knapp, took Senator Reid to a UFO conference, which according to all accounts changed Reid's worldview profoundly. So when Bigelow finally pulled the curtain on NIDS in 2004, he knew just who to call for his next project. After the break, Bigelow makes that call and initiates the flow of your taxpayer dollars to Skinwalker Ranch, and I wish I was kidding about that. Chapter 3, AWSAP, the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, 2007 to 2011. Passionate about what he saw as a lack of government attention to UFOs, Harry Reid went to his friends and fellow senators Ted Stevens and Daniel Inouye in 2007 and persuaded them to help secure $22 million in funding for a program he tentatively called the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program. Nominally, it was about foreign aircraft intrusions, but Reid and Bigelow knew what it was really about. Chapter 4, BASS, the Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, 2008 to 2011. In August 2008, the DIA posted their first solicitation for bids for the first contract of $10 million. There was only one bidder, Robert Bigelow, and the money was awarded. The name of his new company was Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies. The contract required Bigelow to provide a suitable facility, and that's how money from the U.S. government revitalized research into interdimensional poltergeists at Skinwalker Ranch. After a few years, that $22 million had all been spent. What had it been spent on? We shall see. Chapter 5, ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, 2011 to 2012. There had been little support at the Pentagon for AWSAP and its contractor, so no further money was forthcoming. Bigelow decided to continue funding it himself in 2011. A former military man named Luis Elizondo had been at the Pentagon interacting with AWSAP and was aware of its work. And under Bigelow's new funding, Elizondo continued it for about a year under the name ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Though it's never been clear exactly what he did, and the Pentagon has made contradictory statements over whether he actually worked for the program or not. Finally, an accounting was due. Numerous Freedom of Information Act requests poured in a few years later to determine what this $22 million had been spent on. Bigelow's initial $10 million contract was known, but all that the DIA produced to justify the rest of the money was a series of 38 written reports on crazy science fantasy subjects, including stargates, wormholes, warp drive, invisibility cloaking, anti-gravity, and vacuum energy. Every one of these papers is authored by some friend or associate of Bigelow and the Invisible College, including Hal Puthoff himself. After looking at the reports, Actual physicist Sean Carroll told Business Insider in 2018, "It's bits and pieces of theoretical physics dressed up as if it has something to do with potentially real-world applications, which it doesn't. This is not something that's going to connect with engineering anytime soon, probably anytime ever." By all accounts, government officials who were aware of ATIP and its predecessors resisted making the program public simply because it was such an embarrassment. Now that's where we're going to break for this week's show, and it's a perfect cliffhanger because next week we're going to pick it up with the genesis of that infamous 2017 New York Times article that made this whole thing blow up so huge into the public consciousness, creating what I think is the single most successful PR campaign in the history of paranormalists promoting their view to the press. If you assumed that seminal New York Times article from 2017 titled "Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program" was the result of a serious journalistic investigation by one of history's most respected newspapers, next week's episode just might blow your mind, because the answer is no. No, it wasn't. You're listening to Skeptoid. I'm Brian Dunning from Skeptoid.com. The UFO Rogues Gallery Takes Over America, Part 2. Welcome to Part 2 of our episode revealing how, for more than 50 years, a small group of paranormalists and believers in reincarnation have been pursuing their interests on the payroll of the American taxpayers, and finally got their biggest PR success with claims of Navy UFO videos and ever-failing promises of government disclosure. This is a gallery of rogues who have presented a public face of UFOs that threaten our skies, while keeping their true beliefs behind the scenes, which is that they believe UFOs and poltergeists are interdimensional beings who hold the keys to life after death. Sound incredible? Sound too hard to believe that the government could be duped into funding such nonsense? Well, people forget, one does not need to fool the entire government to win a research grant. One needs only to find the right person holding the right purse strings. To briefly recap last week's episode, in Chapter 1, we met the young paranormalist Hal Puthoff in 1978 while he was working at the Stargate Project, testing psychic performers like Uri Geller for the CIA, under the watchful eye of a fascinated government staffer named Chris Mellon. In Chapter 2, Puthoff was funded by the hotel billionaire and reincarnation aficionado Robert Bigelow at Skinwalker Ranch in Utah beginning in 1995, where they called themselves the National Institute for Discovery Science. They tantalized Bigelow's friend, Senator Harry Reid, that poltergeists and flying saucers were the same manifestation of interdimensional beings, and talked him into coughing up $22 million in taxpayer money to fund such an exploration, which he began disbursing to Bigelow in 2008. Chapters 3, 4, and 5 covered the transfer of this $22 million to at least 3 different entities over at least 5 years, all controlled by Bigelow. The last of these various incarnations of the interdimensional poltergeist hunt was called ATIP, the Advanced Aerial Threat Identification Program, and was funded by Bigelow himself with exactly one employee, former military man Luis Elizondo. It was the unveiling of ATIP that first exploded onto the world news scene in 2017, accompanied by Navy UFO videos. In today's episode, we're going to discover just how this group of fringe paranormalists, armed only with Bigelow's very deep pockets and his passion to discover the secret of life after death, managed to capture the world's attention. Their appetite for the paranormal, now somehow reframed for public consumption, as a hunt to learn the truth about UFOs that could threaten the military. Since getting the funding from Harry Reid, the Rogues Gallery had become increasingly fringe and had impressed the government less and less. It seemed like it might all come to an end. Chapter 6, The New York Times, 2017. But then we have that famous 2017 New York Times article that kicked off all the public interest in the UFOs. It spoke about a serious Pentagon investigation into UFOs and made no mention at all of Robert Bigelow, Skinwalker Ranch, or interdimensional poltergeists. There's a good reason, and it's rooted in how the article came to be and who wrote it. Remember Chris Mellon? Fascinated by the idea of UFOs as interdimensional constructs, he'd kept in peripheral touch with our rogues gallery all these years. And now, as he had a very respectable resume from his public life as an intelligence official, they brought him back in. Their funding cut off, their strategy was to go public, and to go public big. Mellon would partner with Elizondo to announce ATIP to the world. Mellon provided the 3 Navy UFO video clips we've all seen a million times, and the 2 men planned their PR strategy. Mellon later told the UFO website Open Minds, "We had a strategy from the outset and a plan before Elizondo even left. We discussed what that would look like, and we've been executing on it ever since." They needed someone to break the news, and they all knew Leslie Kean quite well. She was a busy paranormal and UFO author, and shared an intense interest in aliens with former White House Chief of Staff John Podesta, who'd even written the foreword to one of her UFO books. Bigelow had known her for years. Her boyfriend had been Bud Hopkins, whom Bigelow had previously funded to do alien abduction research. Leslie Kean suggested bringing in an even bigger gun, Hal Blumenthal, who was tight with the New York Times and was currently writing a biography on John Mack, a disgraced Harvard professor who had been Bud Hopkins' partner in the alien abduction research. The Rogues Gallery had formed the dream team to persuade the American public that the government believes in aliens. The New York Times story, Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program, written by Leslie Kean, Hal Blumenthal, and Helen Cooper, ran in December 2017, and the headlines have never quite looked the same since. Recently, Blumenthal said they deliberately downplayed the poltergeists and skinwalkers, and emphasized UFOs and credible threats, to give the story more credibility. Gee, do you think? After the break, how things can go wrong when you shun Robert Bigelow's considerable wallet and turn instead to a burned-out former rock star. Chapter 7, To the Stars Academy, 2017. Simultaneously, their plan included launching To the Stars Academy, a public benefit corporation funded with a $50 million public stock offering. At its head was Tom DeLonge, lifelong UFO obsessive and burned-out former guitarist for Blink-182. Hal Puthoff was a co-founder. Chris Mellon was a paid advisor and bought most of the small amount of stock that was ever actually sold. Luis Elizondo was its head of global security, basically Tom DeLonge's unnecessary bodyguard. And Jacques Vallée handled all the testing of any alien spaceship wreckage they might obtain. They had gotten the whole band all back together, a 50-year through line of dedicated advocates of alien visitation. Although nominally about scientific investigation, To the Stars Academy was actually filed as an entertainment company. It has produced a handful of graphic novels, poetry volumes, and music albums, and its one significant success was the short-lived TV series Unidentified: Inside America's UFO Investigation, for History Channel, of course. By the end of 2020, most of the Rogues Gallery had left To the Stars, possibly realizing that Tom DeLonge was even more spaced out than they'd been prepared for. Some of his online videos are pretty sobering. Chapter 8, The Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies. The Rogues Gallery was again without a home, but once again, Robert Bigelow was quick to provide one. He created and funded the Bigelow Institute for Consciousness Studies to offer $1.5 million in prize money for the best evidence of life after death. Its board of directors are also the judges for the contest, and they are the same familiar faces: Leslie Kean and Hal Puthoff, of course. Also Colm Kelleher, a biologist who led Bigelow's science team at Skinwalker Ranch. Jessica Utz, who had been engaged at the Stargate project to write a report to counter the fraud that Ray Hyman had uncovered. Also a reincarnation author or two, and even the chairman of the metaphysics-focused Esalen Institute in California. It is essential to understand that what is presented by the credulous news media as serious reports that the U.S. military is keenly interested in UFOs and believes they might be alien is actually merely the most successful press campaign by a group of well-funded people who have, for 50 years, dedicated themselves to their belief that psychic powers, telekinesis, poltergeists, life after death, shapeshifters, and interdimensional aliens are all closely interconnected. They've won over a large number of people, including politicians, reporters, and even the few former legitimate scientists they count among their ranks. But it's key to remember that they won them over by misrepresenting their beliefs, as the user-friendly soundbite, "Alien UFOs are in our skies." Their true beliefs are far stranger. None of what the Rogues Gallery have been up to has been investigation or discovery. They had all the answers they wanted 50 years ago, and those conclusions have not changed. As of this writing, HBO has announced it is producing a movie about Leslie Kean's life, and it will no doubt portray her as a brave maverick reporter trying to dig up the truth from a government cover-up, and will likely omit any mention of the fact that she has spent decades as one of the primary creators of that very same mythology. Elizondo has gone a different direction, co-founding a startup called Skyfort that appears to be positioning itself to win lucrative government contracts to interpret UFO videos as evidence of alien visitation. We can only close this episode with our usual exhortation. When you see something in the news that flies in the face of what we know about the way our world and our universe work, you should always be skeptical.
just like Germany was competition for the airplane, the tank, and the nuclear weapon, that we eventually won, but at great cost. China is our competition. Russia is our competition. They see the power of the economy of space in these 4 sectors, and they are rushing to that future. And there is no guardian force in America, but there is in China. China has already built the organization and has the strategy and the doctrine, the technology, and the builders for their guardian force of space. They are building a navy in space with the equivalent of battleships and destroyers that will be able to maneuver and kill and communicate with dominance. What's really going on here? The competition is not about making better satellites or even having a constellation of satellites. When you see China on the far side of the moon mapping today the minerals and the resources so that they can eventually have infrastructure to build and 3D print and have a manufacturing industry in space, what you are watching is the equivalent of us sitting here on our continental United States. Let's say we're in Miami and we're looking out over the wide open ocean. That ocean is deep space. The orbit around the Earth is the shoreline where the waves are crashing. The deep water is space. And there is a continent out there 3 times the size of Africa. That's the moon. And nobody lives there. It's only 3 days away. It has massive amounts of everything that Mother Earth has, to include water on the South Pole in the craters greater than the Great Lakes as far as volume. And China is racing with ships on that open ocean to that great open desolate place that can be turned into resources and blessing for a marketplace. And they're doing it not just to get the resources, but to tap into the trillion-dollar markets on planet Earth. Imagine what you could do if you could sell technology to somebody from China and deliver Wi-Fi. And once you've built the infrastructure in space, you can deliver it for pennies. It's like America is a race car that has been winning races for 70 years since World War II. We're going 90 miles an hour, and we've done it that way since World War II. It's our entire mindset, our entire lives the same way. China is in a car right behind us. The car isn't as good, but it's going 120 miles an hour. We can say today we are dominant in space. But the trend lines is what you have to look at. And they will pass us in the next few years if we do not do something. And they will win this race, and then they will put roadblocks up to space.
You described our offensive and defensive capabilities in space versus those that our adversaries currently have and what they will have in the very near future.
China is feverishly working on those 3 components to be applied outside of the gravity well. That's beyond the orbits into the moon and the cislunar space, using the sun as their source of energy that is perpetual and can be beamed to any place in that ecosystem. They are literally building the coal stations equivalent to the ones we built in the Pacific when Teddy Roosevelt built the Great White Fleet with iron ships instead of wooden ships. In fact, so China is building nuclear thermal power propulsion capabilities to be able to maneuver in space. We know how to do that, and we can do it better.
My question is, what can we do to spread this information? Because I have, this is not new. We get tidbits of this through the news media, but nothing to the extent that you have explained it tonight. This is critical to the future of our country.
Amen.
This is it.
Yeah. Now, we have machines that can bring water out of the air with that energy from space, where you could just give them a piece of technology and they can have clean water with no pipes, no aquifers, no rivers required. We need resources to feed our families and shelter our people. We need the ability to defend those things. We need the sense of belonging that comes with loving our families and our tribes. And we need to understand what's going on around us. Those are the only 4 things we need: resources, defending the resources, a sense of belonging, and understanding.